I found the photograph at an estate sale in rural Vermont. It was mid-September, one of those crisp autumn days when the leaves are just beginning to turn, and the air smells of wood smoke and approaching winter. I'd driven 3 hours from Boston to attend the sale of the Whitlock estate. A family that had lived in the same farmhouse for 5 generations before the last descendant died without heirs. The house was exactly what you'd expect. Weathered clapboard, sagging front porch, windows that hadn't been cleaned in decades. Inside, the accumulated possessions of 140 years were spread across tables and floors, furniture, dishes, tools, books, and in one corner, boxes of photographs. I collect old photographs. Not famous ones or historically significant images, just ordinary family photos from the 19th and early 20th centuries. There's something haunting about them. All those lives frozen in silver and glass. All those people who were once as real and vital as I am, now reduced to anonymous faces staring out from fading prints. The photograph that caught my attention was large, maybe 11 by 14 inches, mounted on thick cardboard. It showed a family gathered on what appeared to be a farmhouse porch. Based on the clothing and photographic style, I guessed 1880s. 13 people in total, adults and children arranged in 2 rows, some standing on the porch, others seated on a bench in front. The composition was typical for the era. Everyone wore their Sunday best. The adults looked stern and formal, hands positioned carefully. The children tried to hold still, but fidgeted despite the photographer's instructions. The long exposure time required for cameras of that period meant any movement created blur, and several of the children showed that characteristic ghosting. But one figure was different. In the front row, standing between 2 seated adults, was a girl who appeared to be 7 or 8 years old. She wore a white dress and had long dark hair. But unlike the slight blur of the fidgeting children, this girl was severely out of focus. Her features completely indistinct, her form almost translucent. She looked more like a double exposure or a reflection in glass than a solid person. The effect was striking enough that I bought the photograph for $5, along with several others from the same family. That evening in my apartment, I examined the image more carefully under my desk lamp. The blurred girl stood in the center of the composition, and the more I looked at her, the more wrong she seemed. The adults on either side of her weren't looking at the camera. They were looking down at her, their expressions difficult to read. Fear, sorrow, recognition. And their hands, positioned at their sides, seemed to be reaching toward her, but not quite touching, as if afraid to make contact. I scanned the photograph at high resolution and opened it on my computer. At 600 dpi, I could see details invisible to the naked eye. The wooden boards of the porch, the texture of clothing, individual strands of hair on the clearer figures. But the girl remained indistinct. In fact, the higher the resolution, the stranger she looked. Where the other figures showed the grain structure of the photographic emulsion, she seemed to have none. She was smooth, almost glowing, like something that existed between the layers of the photograph rather than on its surface. I zoomed in on her face. No features were visible, just a pale oval that might have been a face, or might have been nothing at all. And at the edges of her form, where she should have met the background, there was something odd. The porch boards behind her were visible through her dress, as if she was partially transparent. On the back of the photograph's cardboard mount, written in faded pencil, was a note. Whitlock family, August 1887. Standing, Marcus, Theodore, Benjamin, Samuel, Catherine. Seated, Father James, Mother Ruth, Aunt Margaret. Children, Robert, Elizabeth, Grace, Thomas. I counted the names, 12 people. But the photograph clearly showed 13 figures. The blurred girl had no name. The next morning, I started researching the Whitlock family. The Vermont Historical Society had records dating back to the town's founding in 1785, and the Whitlocks had been prominent residents, farmers, merchants, local officials. Birth and death records, census data, newspaper mentions, all were meticulously preserved. The 1887 photograph appeared to show 3 generations. I found James Whitlock in the 1880 census, age 62, farmer, with wife Ruth, age 58. Living with them were their adult sons Marcus, Theodore, Benjamin, and Samuel, their daughter Catherine, and 4 grandchildren, Robert, Elizabeth, Grace, and Thomas. I cross-referenced this with the names on the photograph. Perfect match. 12 people, all accounted for. But what about the 13th figure? The blurred girl in the white dress. I expanded my search. Looking for other children in the family, I found cemetery records, church registries, school enrollment lists, and there, in the Whitlock family plot at Pine Ridge Cemetery, I found her. Clara Whitlock, born March 15th, 1879, died August 12th, 1887, age 8 years, 5 months, beloved daughter of Marcus and Catherine Whitlock, taken too soon, forever in our hearts, August 12th, 1887. The photograph was dated August 1887, probably taken late in the month based on the handwriting, which meant Clara had died just weeks, maybe days, before the photograph was taken. I pulled up the census records again. Marcus and Catherine Whitlock had been listed with 1 child in 1880, a daughter, Clara, age 1. In the 1890 census, they were listed with no children. I drove back to Vermont the following weekend. The Whitlock farmhouse had already sold, but the estate sale organizers gave me contact information for the local historical society. There, a librarian named Mrs. Peterson helped me search through newspaper archives. We found Clara's obituary in the August 15th, 1887 edition of the Vermont Valley News, Death of a Child. Clara Elizabeth Whitlock, beloved daughter of Marcus and Catherine Whitlock of Whitlock Farm, passed from this life on Friday last after a brief illness. The child, 8 years of age, had been in perfect health until Wednesday evening, when she complained of feeling cold despite the August heat. By Thursday morning, she had fallen into a fever from which she never recovered. Dr. Hartwell attended, but could do nothing to save the child. Services were held yesterday at the Methodist Church, with interment at Pine Ridge Cemetery. The family is devastated by this sudden loss. I sat back, the old newspaper brittle under my fingers. A healthy child, dead within 2 days. The obituary mentioned fever, but that could have meant anything in 1887. Scarlet fever, typhoid, meningitis, any number of diseases that killed children with terrifying speed before modern medicine. "Sad, isn't it?" Mrs. Peterson said. "Children died so often back then. Almost every family lost at least one." "Do you know anything else about the Whitlocks?" "A bit. They were one of the founding families. The farm stayed in the family until just recently. You probably saw it advertised. James Whitlock, the patriarch, was quite strict from what I've heard. Very religious. There are stories." She paused. "Stories? Local legends, really. The kind of thing you hear in small towns. After Clara died, people said the family was never the same. The parents rarely spoke. The other children grew up and moved away as soon as they could. and supposedly Clara's mother, Catherine, would sit in the girl's room at night, talking to the empty air as if Clara was still there. Did anyone ever report seeing Clara after she died? Ghost stories, that sort of thing. Mrs. Peterson looked at me strangely. Why do you ask? I showed her the photograph on my phone. I bought this at the estate sale. The girl in the white dress, the blurred one, she's not listed in the names on the back. But based on the dates, I think she might be Clara. Mrs. Peterson studied the image, her expression growing troubled. That's unusual. Victorian post-mortem photography was common, of course. Families would photograph the deceased, especially children. But those were formal portraits of the body, usually in a casket or posed as if sleeping. Not family gatherings like this. Unless they believed she was there, I said quietly. We looked at each other, the same thought forming. The Whitlocks hadn't accidentally captured something on film. They'd intentionally included Clara in their family portrait, believing or hoping she would appear. Mrs. Peterson disappeared into the back room and returned with a ledger. This is from the Methodist Church, records of deaths and burials. She flipped through yellowed pages until she found the entry. Here, Clara Whitlock, buried August 13th, 1887, and there's a note in the margin. I read the small, cramped handwriting. Parents request gravestone be placed facing west toward the family home. Mother insists child must be able to find her way back if she wakes confused. My skin prickled. That's not normal burial practice. No, but grief makes people do strange things. Mrs. Peterson closed the ledger. There's one more thing you should know. The Methodist Church records show another entry from September 1887, a request from the Whitlock family to have their home blessed by Reverend Michaels. The reason given was disturbances of a spiritual nature. That night in my hotel room, I couldn't stop looking at the photograph. I'd brought the original with me, and I propped it against the lamp on the nightstand. In the warm light, Clara's figure seemed to glow more brightly than the rest of the image. And the more I looked at her, the more convinced I became that she was looking back. Not at the camera. At me. I tried to sleep but kept waking to sounds I couldn't identify. Footsteps in the hallway outside my room, except the footsteps were too light, too quick. A child running. And once, around 3 a.m., I woke to the smell of something burning. Not wood or plastic, but something organic, like fever-heated skin. The next morning, I drove to Pine Ridge Cemetery. The old section where the Whitlocks were buried occupied a hilltop overlooking the valley. Weathered headstones tilted at odd angles, their inscriptions worn nearly smooth by a century of weather. The Whitlock family plot was easy to find, a large granite marker surrounded by smaller stones. James and Ruth, Marcus and Catherine, Theodore, Benjamin, Samuel. All the adults from the photograph, all buried between 1895 and 1920. And at the center, a small white marble stone. Clara Whitlock, March 15th, 1879, August 12th, 1887. She walks with angels now, the stone faced west, exactly as the church records had noted. From here, I could see the valley below, and in the distance the shape of what must have been the Whitlock farmhouse. I knelt beside Clara's grave, and noticed something odd. The grass around her stone was different from the rest of the cemetery. Paler, thinner, as if nothing wanted to grow there. And when I placed my hand on the marble, it was cold. Not just cool from being in shade, but genuinely cold, the kind of cold that makes your bones ache. I took photographs of all the Whitlock graves, documenting the dates and inscriptions. Then, on impulse, I pulled out the family portrait and held it up, comparing the faces to the names on the stones. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In the photograph, standing on the porch behind the seated adults, was the man identified as Marcus, Clara's father. I'd looked at him dozens of times, noting his stern expression, his formal posture, his carefully positioned hands. But I'd never looked at his eyes before. Not really looked. His eyes, clearly visible in the high-resolution scan, weren't focused on the camera. They were looking down at Clara, at the blurred figure standing in front of him. And his expression wasn't stern. It was terrified. I drove back to the Historical Society and asked Mrs. Peterson if I could see any other Whitlock family photographs. She brought out 3 more, all from different years. An 1885 portrait showing Marcus, Catherine, and Clara as a toddler. A normal, happy-looking family. An 1890 photograph showing just Marcus and Catherine, looking aged beyond their years, their faces hollow with grief. And one from 1895, showing the entire extended family gathered for what might have been a reunion or anniversary. 12 people, all clearly focused and properly exposed. No blurred figures, no Clara. They stopped trying to include her, I said. What do you mean? I explained my theory, that the 1887 photograph wasn't an accidental double exposure or a child who'd moved during the long exposure. The Whitlocks had intentionally included Clara in their family portrait, taken just weeks after her death. They'd positioned the camera, arranged the family, and waited for Clara to appear. And she had. Mrs. Peterson listened quietly, then said, "There's someone you should talk to. Martha Whitlock lives in town. She's a distant cousin, descended from Benjamin Whitlock's line. She knows the family history better than anyone." Martha Whitlock was 93, and sharp as a knife. She lived in a small house near the center of town, surrounded by boxes of family papers and photographs she'd been organizing for years with the intention of writing a family history. When I showed her the 1887 photograph, her face went pale. My God. I'd heard stories about this, but I never thought it really existed. You know about this photograph? Know about it? It's practically legend in the family. The photograph that split the Whitlocks apart. The one they tried to destroy but couldn't. She gestured for me to sit and began telling me the story her grandmother had told her, passed down through 4 generations. After Clara died in August 1887, her mother, Catherine, became convinced the child was still present in the house. She claimed to hear Clara singing in her bedroom at night, to find the girl's toys rearranged in the morning, to feel small hands tugging at her skirt when she did housework. Marcus, Clara's father, was skeptical at first, but then he started experiencing things too. Footsteps running up and down the stairs when no one was there. The smell of Clara's lavender soap in rooms that had been aired out. And once, he claimed, he'd seen Clara herself standing in the doorway of her bedroom, just standing there watching him, before fading away like morning mist. The other family members noticed as well. The house felt wrong, they said. Too cold in some rooms, too warm in others. Doors that opened themselves, shadows that moved independently of any light source. James Whitlock, the patriarch and a deeply religious man, declared that his granddaughter was trapped between worlds. Her sudden death had left her confused, unable to understand she was dead, and her spirit clung to the only home she'd known. He decided they would help Clara see that she was still part of the family, still loved, still welcomed. And the way to do that was to include her in a family portrait, to capture her on film as proof that she remained with them. So in late August 1887, just weeks after Clara's death, James hired a photographer from Boston, a man with a reputation for spiritualist photography, for capturing images of the dead. The family gathered on the porch where Clara had played every summer. They arranged themselves carefully, leaving a space in the front row. And they waited. The photographer set up his camera and prepared the glass plate. He told the family to remain still, to think about Clara, to call to her in their minds. The exposure would take several minutes. Martha paused in her story, her old hands trembling slightly. My grandmother said that during those minutes, as they all stood frozen and waiting, they felt Clara arrive. The temperature dropped so suddenly that several people could see their breath, despite the August heat, and they heard her voice, just once, very clearly, saying, "I'm here, Mama." When the photographer developed the plate, there she was. A blurred figure in a white dress, standing exactly where they'd left space for her. But she wasn't clear like the others. She was translucent, indistinct, like something caught between states of being. And when they looked at the photograph, truly looked at it, they realized they'd made a terrible mistake. I leaned forward. "What do you mean?" They'd proven Clara was there, but they'd also trapped her. By capturing her on film, by documenting her presence, they'd anchored her spirit to the physical world. She couldn't move on. The photograph became a tether, binding her to the house, to the family, to the life she'd lost. Things got worse after that, much worse. The sounds in the house became frantic. Clara running through rooms, calling for her mother, crying. Objects would fly off shelves, doors would slam. And at night, family members would wake to find Clara standing over their beds, her face finally visible, her eyes desperate and pleading. She wanted to leave, but couldn't. The photograph had trapped her. Martha stood and retrieved a box from her bookshelf. Inside were old letters, bound with ribbon. These are from Catherine Whitlock to her sister, written in the years after Clara died. She handed me one, dated October 1887. "Dearest sister, I fear I have made a grave error. We sought to prove Clara remained with us, and we succeeded too well. She is here, but she is not at peace. She weeps at night. She calls my name. I hear her voice in every room, begging me to let her go, but I do not know how. Marcus has moved out of the house, saying he cannot bear it any longer. Father refuses to admit we've done anything wrong, insisting we must simply endure until Clara's spirit finds its own peace. But I know better. We have bound her here with our grief and our need." The photograph sits in the parlor, and I cannot look at it without feeling her desperation. We captured something that should have been allowed to fade. And now, I do not know how to set her free. Another letter, from November. The Reverend came to bless the house. Clara screamed through the entire ceremony. We all heard her, even the Reverend, though he tried to pretend he didn't. When he touched the photograph with holy water, it burned his hand. He left and refused to return. I have tried to destroy the photograph myself. I threw it in the fire, but it would not catch. I broke the glass and tore the image, but by morning it was whole again, sitting on the mantel as if nothing had happened. I fear Clara is not the only presence here anymore. By opening the door for her, I think we may have opened it for others as well. The final letter, dated January 1888. I am leaving this house. Marcus has already gone, and the children refuse to visit. Even Father has admitted we must abandon this place. Whatever we created with that photograph, it has taken root too deeply to be removed. I leave Clara's room exactly as it was, in the hope that if we go, she might find peace, without us to anchor her. The photograph I will seal in the attic, wrapped in cloth and locked in a trunk, where perhaps time will do what I cannot, release her from this prison we created. Pray for my daughter. Pray that one day she finds her way to the rest she deserves. I looked up at Martha, my throat tight. What happened to the family? They scattered. Catherine and Marcus moved to Boston and never returned. They had no more children. The other sons left for different states. James died in 1895, and in his will he left specific instructions that the farmhouse was never to be sold while any Whitlock still lived. It was to remain sealed, untouched, a monument to their mistake. The house stayed in the family for 140 years, passed from one distant relative to another, none of them willing to live there. Most of them never even visited. And that photograph stayed locked in the attic all that time, wrapped in cloth, hidden away. Until the estate sale, I said quietly. Martha nodded. Until someone broke the seal. Someone opened the trunk. Someone brought Clara back into the light after a century of darkness. I felt cold despite the warm room. I bought it. I brought it home. Then you need to be very careful, Martha said, because if the stories are true, that photograph is more than just an image. It's a trap, a binding, a door, and by taking it from the house, by bringing it into your world, you may have let Clara follow you. That night, I couldn't bring myself to return to my hotel. I drove straight back to Boston, the photograph wrapped in a blanket in my trunk. I told myself I was being irrational, that there was no such thing as photographs that trapped spirits, that this was all just family legend and coincidence. But as I drove through the darkness, I kept seeing movement in my rearview mirror. A small figure in the back seat, there and not there, visible only in the corner of my eye. When I got home, I immediately sealed the photograph in a plastic storage box and put it in my closet. I turned on every light in my apartment and tried to convince myself everything was fine. At 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of running feet. Small feet, pattering down my hallway, back and forth, back and forth. I lay in bed, frozen, listening. The running continued for 5 minutes, then 10. Then it stopped. Silence. Then, from just outside my bedroom door, a child's voice. "Where's Mama?" I didn't sleep the rest of that night. When dawn came, I called Martha Whitlock. "She's here," I said without preamble. Clara followed me. "What do I do?" Martha was quiet for a long moment. My grandmother told me that Catherine tried everything to free Clara's spirit. Blessings, prayers, rituals, nothing worked. The photograph couldn't be destroyed while Clara was bound to it. And Clara couldn't be freed while the photograph existed. A paradox. Exactly. But there was one thing Catherine never tried. She never gave Clara what she was asking for. Which was to go home. Clara died confused and frightened. She woke from death not understanding what had happened, calling for her mother, looking for familiar surroundings. The photograph captured her in that state of confusion, trapped her before she could understand and move on. For 140 years, she's been calling for her mother, trying to find her way home. The house is sold. There is no home anymore. Then take her to where home can still exist. Take her to her grave. Let her see that her body rests peacefully, that she has a place, that her family remembered her. Sometimes spirits linger because they don't know they're dead. Sometimes they just need to see their own grave to understand. The next morning, I drove back to Vermont with the photograph unwrapped on my passenger seat. I could feel her presence in the car, that peculiar coldness, the sense of being watched by eyes I couldn't see. I drove directly to Pine Ridge Cemetery and carried the photograph to Clara's grave. The morning was gray and cold, threatening rain. I knelt beside the small white stone and carefully positioned the photograph against it. "Clara," I said, feeling foolish but speaking anyway, "this is your grave. This is where your body rests. Your mother Catherine put you here, facing toward home so you could find your way. But you've been lost for a very long time." The air grew colder. The threatening rain seemed to pause, holding its breath. Your family loved you. They tried to keep you with them because they couldn't bear to lose you. But they made a mistake. They trapped you when they should have let you go. And I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry you've been confused and frightened for so long. I placed my hand on the photograph, on the blurred figure of Clara in her white dress. It's time to rest now. Your mother isn't here anymore. She died a long time ago, but she's waiting for you, wherever people go when they leave this world. You don't have to stay trapped in this photograph. You don't have to keep calling for her. You just need to let go. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the photograph beneath my hand grew warm. Not hot, just gently warm, like a sleeping child's forehead. And the blurred figure of Clara seemed to move, not in the photograph itself, but as if something was pulling away from it, separating itself from the emulsion and silver. The air shimmered above the grave. And I saw her, just for a moment. A little girl in a white dress, dark hair, 8 years old and translucent as morning mist. She looked at me with eyes that were finally clear, finally aware, and she smiled. Not a sad smile or a desperate smile, but the relieved smile of someone who'd been lost and finally found their way. Then she turned and looked west, toward where the old farmhouse stood. And she began to walk, her small form growing fainter with each step, until she faded completely into the gray morning. The photograph under my hand was just a photograph now. The warmth had gone. And when I looked at it, Clara's figure had changed. She was still blurred, still indistinct, but something about her posture had altered. She no longer looked desperate or frightened. She looked peaceful. I left the photograph there, propped against Clara's grave. If someone found it, they'd just see an old Victorian family portrait with a girl who'd moved during the exposure. They wouldn't know what it had been. A prison, a trap, a tether that bound a child's spirit to the world for 140 years. Before I left the cemetery, I placed a small bouquet of wildflowers on Clara's grave. "Rest now," I whispered. "You're home." That was 3 months ago. I haven't heard running feet in my apartment since. Haven't smelled fever heat or felt that particular coldness that meant something dead was trying to be present. Clara found her way home, to wherever her mother waited, and the photograph released its hold. But I think about her sometimes. About a little girl who died suddenly at age 8, waking from death confused and calling for her mama. About a family so devastated by grief that they tried to prove she was still with them, never understanding that proof would become a cage. About how love, sometimes, can trap us just as securely as chains. I still collect old photographs, but now I look at them differently. All those stern Victorian faces, those carefully arranged families, those children who moved during long exposures and appear as ghosts in the frame. I wonder how many of them are like Clara. How many are more than just blurred images? How many are still trapped, still calling, still trying to find their way home? Last week, I received a package in the mail. No return address, just a padded envelope with my name written in shaky, elderly handwriting. Inside was a photograph. A different family, a different era, maybe 1890s. 11 people gathered on a porch. And in the back row, partially hidden behind the others, a figure so blurred and translucent it looked more like a smudge than a person. On the back, written in that same shaky hand, "We found this in our grandmother's attic. She said it cursed our family. We thought it was just superstition until our daughter started hearing a child crying in the walls. Please help. Please take it away from us. I haven't opened it yet, haven't looked at it except for that first glance. But at night, I hear soft crying, and sometimes, in the corner of my vision, I see a small figure standing in my doorway, watching me with desperate eyes. Another child, another family, another mistake made out of love and grief. I know what I should do. I should find the grave, let them see their resting place, help them understand it's time to let go. But there are so many old photographs, so many blurred figures. So many families who couldn't accept death and accidentally trapped the ones they loved. How many are still out there? How many children are still running through walls they can't see, calling for parents who died a century ago, trapped in photographs that were meant to remember them, but instead became their prisons? I look at the new photograph sometimes, still sealed in its envelope, and I hear the crying grow louder. And I know that eventually I'll have to look, have to help, have to find another grave and speak words of release to another spirit that's been lost too long. Because once you've helped one, once you've seen how they look when they finally understand and turn toward home, you can't stop, can't ignore the others, can't pretend you don't know what those blurred figures really are. The photograph of Clara still sits on her grave, I assume, unless someone took it, unless it found its way to another estate sale, another collector, another person who will bring it home and wonder why they hear running feet at 3 a.m. But Clara herself is gone. She found her way home. She saw her grave, understood what had happened, and let go of the world that had held her so long. And sometimes, on quiet mornings, I like to think she found her mother waiting, that Catherine and Clara are finally together again, in whatever place people go when they leave this world, that the family that grief tore apart has finally been reunited, that all the running, all the searching, all the desperate calling has finally ended in peace. The crying in my apartment continues. The new photograph waits to be opened. And I know that soon I'll have to do it again, find the grave, speak the words, help another lost child find their way home. Because that's what these photographs are, really. Not just images or historical artifacts or family mementos. They're cages, and someone has to open the doors.